now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online bookstores everywhere today. O'Shea Duke Jackson recently made a video talking about how many black men were no longer talking about black women. And when you start to see black men no longer talking about a subject, that is the time for people to really get concerned. Because when you see a group of men no longer discussing something, that means that they no longer care anymore. Now, many people out here were upset back in the early days of YouTube when we had many YouTubers out here talking about the subjects of black women. And oftentimes you had lots of people out here, whether they be black women or these beta males, and they would go out here and try to flag the channels of many black male YouTubers who were talking about criticism of black women. And because many of those black men were getting their channels flagged and having their channels taken down, we started to see what was called the YouTube gender war. And this gender war went on until about 2013 or about 2014, when we had many of these YouTubers talking about wanting to file a class action lawsuit against YouTube and Google. And over the last couple of years, we've seen numerous skirmishes in this gender war, including a recent campaign to create a hit list to take down many black male YouTubers' channels. But what we're seeing right now, as related to what O'Shea was talking about, is more and more black men just walking away from the whole table. And this goes back to a concept that was presented back in the days of the gender war called the Wall of Silence. Now, this Wall of Silence, as proposed by many black male YouTubers, was many black men just sitting there and just walking away from black women and not saying anything at all. And once you've got men behind the Wall of Silence, that means that all communication is practically over. And what we're seeing right now is more and more men walking behind the Wall of Silence and going another way and getting on with their lives. Many of these black men out here are realizing that trying to communicate with some of these black women is impossible, and trying to have relations with black women is untenable. And because these men feel like the situation is impossible and dealing with black women is untenable, what is happening right now is we're seeing more and more men walking away from the table as related to having relations with black women due to their negative experiences with some of the more predatory and more out of control black females. And what they're doing is leaving the table altogether. And why should many black women be concerned? Because again, once a man walks away from the table, that means he's done. Because when a man cuts off all communication, that means he is practically finished as related to an individual. That's a code that I have followed ever since I was 13 years old. If I have to deal with a toxic individual who is extremely out of control or participating in behaviors that are just going to mess my life up, I would cut that individual off and have no contact with that individual ever again. And that's what many black men are doing right now. They're just deciding that there's no way they can work with many of these black women as related to their experiences on social media and outside in the real world. And they're just deciding to just cut these women off and cut off all contact with those women. And they're cutting off contact with those black women because of their numerous negative experiences with black women. And they're cutting off black women because they, in many cases, believe they have too much to lose. And because many of these men have gone out here and had to work twice as hard to get their jobs, twice as hard to build what they've had to maintain over the last couple of years, they just have too much to lose to deal with those black women out here who want to participate in firing salvos in the gender war. And they've decided to completely move on because many of these men are realizing that time is something that they can't get back in their lives, and every second they take to waste dealing with black women in these skirmishes as related to this gender war and all of the ridiculous drama that goes on going back and forth with many of these females is a complete waste of their time. And many of these men are realizing that the time they take going back and forth with black females is time that they could take to go out here and continue building their platforms and going out here and building tangible resources for themselves. So many of those black men out here are realizing that they could just do more constructive things that with their time than sit here and argue with black women about their behavior. Many of the black men out here are realizing what I realized many years ago when I was a teenager, that many of these women were set in their ways when they were 15 and 16, and they're not going to change. So why should I waste my time waiting for them to change, and when I can go out here and focus on doing more constructive things? And this is why so many black men are falling more and more silent, because they realize going back and forth with some of these black women is just arguing with a brick wall, and it's just a waste of precious time to sit there and argue with a brick wall, because a brick wall is set in stone, and a brick wall is not going to change unless it gets demolished. So it's just a waste of time to sit here arguing with these females when you can go out here and put work in yourself and take yourself to the next level. So many men, I believe, are walking away because they realize that it's an exercise in futility to keep going out here and trying to reach and connect with someone who doesn't want to connect with them. And they're realizing that it's just a waste of time to sit there and try to hope that somebody will eventually change for the better. So they're realizing that many of these black women are set in their ways, and many are going to be taught a culture where they're just not going to learn how to break out of the paradigm of failure that I go in depth in my book, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. So instead of them trying to be miserable in the company of miserable black women, many men are just looking to walk away and go and try to live their best life possible, because they're realizing that even though they love black women, there's nothing they can do for many of these black females on these social media platforms, because these women are just so mentally damaged. There is nothing they can do to help them, and to stay here arguing with them is again a waste of precious time, and it's also has an impact on your mental health, because the longer you deal with a toxic person, the sicker they make you, because eventually you keep going back and forth with this person, and eventually their sickness becomes your sickness. So many men are just saying, look, I can't keep going back and forth with this person, and it's just a waste of time to sit here arguing with these females over the same talking points over and over again. And that's just the definition of insanity, because doing the exact same thing does not yield a different result. And sitting here trying to argue with a generation of lost black women is not going to yield any sort of change whatsoever. So many of the men out here are just walking away, and they're going silent. And again, when a man goes silent and a man walks away, that is a sign that he no longer cares. And if he no longer cares, that means it's the absolute end as related to an individual, a subject, or an issue. And when it comes down to many of these black men as related to black women, they have already hit the end as related to things, and they've hit that end button because they just realize, again, their time is too precious, they have too much to lose, and they just don't want to sit here continuing to go back and forth in insane, endless drama, regurgitating the same talking points over and over again. Because if somebody is not listening, no amount of talking is going to convince someone who is really sitting there and adamant about their position. So the best thing to do is just to let that person have their opinion, you have your opinion, and then you go your own way and just leave that person alone and deal with the black women who want to deal with you, and deal with the people who want to deal with you. That's a lesson I learned back when I was 16 years old. When you're dealing with people who don't want to deal with you, you just cut them off and go your own way, and then just deal with those who want to deal with you, because it's just a waste of time to sit here watching somebody continue to go back and forth over regurgitating the same talking points that just don't seem to register and resonate with the other individual. And many more black men are realizing that it's just a waste of their time. So that's why, again, you're seeing more of these black men going silent, because they just don't care anymore. And again, when a man does not care, that's the time to get concerned, because he's walked away from the table. And when he walks away from the table, that's a sign that he's practically done. And if he's done, that means he's finished. So a lot of them sitting out here thinking, I can get him to come back, but he's not coming back, because while he was profane and angry while he was making these videos talking about black women, but that was a sign he still had interest and cared. But once that man went silent, that was him going behind the wall of silence. And after he walked behind the wall of silence, he walked away once and for all. Now, if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my men's issues books like Stop Simping and The Man Crisis and Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, you can find all of those books in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com. You can also find them on Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Taking Care of Business. The man who rules the world breaks in a brand new partner to help him take care of business in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, Taking Care of Business at paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.